Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this session on augmenting creativity. If you don't know me, my name is Angus May. I'm a tutor at the Royal College of Arts on the Information Experience Design programme. I'm also a PhD candidate at the University of the Arts London, doing a PhD focused on creativity and AI, and thinking about the role that AI can play within the creative process. The aim of the session today is really, first of all, as a sort of pre-event for a workshop that we're running in June at the Creativity and Cognition conference in Venice. So that's a conference workshop that's going to be looking at how we can augment personal approaches to creativity with AI. The point of this session is really to introduce people to some common AI tools that could be used quite simply within the creative process to enhance it in some way. So what we're going to do in this session is, first of all, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the workshop that we've got coming up and how this links into that process. And then going to go through some strategies that perhaps kind of highlight the way that these tools can be used within the creative process, and kind of talk about the approach that we're wanting to take to enhancing creativity with AI. And then going to introduce 4 tools that could be used by people within the creative process. And the focus of these tools is that they are as simple and as accessible as possible. And I'll describe that in a bit more detail as we go through. If you have any questions or there's any issues, then feel free to raise a hand in the webinar or send a chat through. There'll be a chance for more questions at the end of this process as well. Okay. So, aims of this session, we're going to introduce this workshop. We're going to talk about creative strategies, as I say, and then we're going to introduce these 4 tools. So the 4 tools that we're going to be looking at are JPDJ, which is a text generation tool, Runway ML, which is a fairly kind of fully featured platform online for running machine learning and creative AI functionality. We're going to be looking at, especially in terms of generating images and also training your own AI models or machine learning models. We're also going to look at VQCAN plus Clip, which is another sort of text to image tool or image generation tool. And we're going to look at Wombat, which is a really simple image generation tool using AI. So let me tell you a little bit, first of all, about the conference that we're going to be running. So as I say, this session that we're running now is a sort of an early sort of pre-session for the conference that we're running in June. And it's part of the ACM's Creativity and Cognition conference. So the workshop will be running on the 20th of June 2022. And we're taking submissions now. So if people are interested in attending this workshop and taking part in the discussions, then details of the website where you can apply to take place in that. What we're looking for from people is really to discuss things with creatives who are using AI within their work. The big aim of this workshop in particular is to have quite a broad audience and to be able to talk to creative professionals, creative practitioners who maybe don't already have existing knowledge of AI, who maybe aren't coming from a technical background, who haven't done a lot of coding, or at least not a lot of coding in AI itself. And what we'd really like to do is kind of put AI in the hands of those people and see what happens. What kind of tools can you use and what kind of role do you find that AI is playing within your process? So we're interested in hearing from designers, from artists, from craftspeople, particularly people who might be working with analog processes or traditional processes that perhaps haven't had a lot of kind of AI being used in them up to now. And we'd like to see what kind of emerging, experimental, practical, improvisational methods might emerge when you have access to a few kind of AI tools and some generative tools around machine learning. So that's the aim of the workshop. The kind of the themes that we're going to be looking at within this workshop, so the workshop we're running in June, are as follows. So first of all, collaboration. So we're interested in how we might collaborate with an AI system. So working alongside an AI, can we think of it almost as another creative practitioner, someone else in the room who can bounce ideas off, who can make suggestions? There's lots of kind of models for how that could work within an AI process and within a creative process. we're also interested in serendipity. So thinking about the ways that AI might bring randomness, novelty, unexpected results into a creative process, and how that might kind of be able to inspire or to provoke creativity by bringing in this sort of chance, this randomness that might be able to be used by creative professionals. And another thing that we're looking at is creative reflection. So one of the interesting things we've found when running workshops like this before is that the process of working with AI, in particular the process of training an AI, so getting it to learn perhaps about your own creative method, maybe training it on the contents of your own creative outcomes, so your sketches, your designs, your paintings, your music, whatever that might be. The sort of discipline that's involved in that, in other words, getting quite a lot of material together in order to train an AI, which is what you have to do, so hundreds and hundreds of images. Actually, that can be quite a revealing process within creative practice. So bringing this stuff together, kind of categorizing it, and then also then seeing the results of that. So then generating stuff that's trained on your own work can reveal patterns, can reveal themes perhaps that you weren't aware of before. So we're interested in that element as well. But we're also open to other modes and other interesting roles perhaps that AI can play within this process. So you're very welcome to join this workshop. So you could just watch this session today and get an introduction to these tools. Everyone is very welcome to do that. But if you look at this and actually you have some ideas around how you might use AI within your creative process, and you might want to come to the workshop to talk about those, to share those with others, and to kind of take this work further, then by all means join our workshop. You can find more information about it at the website here, so augmentingcreativity.info. For submissions, we're trying to make it as easy as possible. We're not looking for a written piece. We just want a 2-minute video demonstrating your approach. So trying things out, showing us how you've used AI and what kind of role that has led for AI within your process. So that can be uploaded via our website. There'll be a form on our website to upload that by the 15th of May. So a fairly simple process. And hopefully the session today, if you haven't really worked with AI before, but you think you might be interested, then you could use some of these tools to help you demonstrate your approach, demonstrate what you're interested in. Okay, so that's the kind of workshop. That's to give some context for why we're talking about all this today. What I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about, I guess, our approach to creativity. There's lots of ways that we could use AI within the creative process, and lots of ways that people have. So lots of approaches, lots of different ways that AI and machine learning can be integrated at different stages of the creative process. What we're kind of interested in, certainly in this session and as a focus for the workshop in general, is thinking about, well, these two elements. So defining creativity perhaps as novelty and value. Now, there's lots of definitions of creativity, but a lot of them tend to come back to these two factors: so novelty or originality, doing something new, and value, doing something which is valuable. So not just having randomness that's sort of meaningless, but having something that is actually of value to someone, or has personal value, or has a value to a community. So one of the elements that we could explore potentially with AI is perhaps the first one, novelty. So thinking about how AI might be able to help you enhance originality within your work, make you take your work in new directions, kind of provide you with that inspiration to do something a bit different. And then you can sort of look at the value element perhaps and think, okay, it's given me lots of options. Actually, this is the most valuable, this is the most interesting, or this is the most suitable for the group I'm working on perhaps. So to think about novelty, and because the focus of our workshop really is about finding very pragmatic, very simple ways that AI can be integrated into the creative process, what I'd like to do just for part of this session today is think about actually some examples, not of contemporary uses of cutting edge AI, but thinking about ways that creativity has been enhanced, inspired in the past, pre-AI, even pre-computers, as a way of thinking about kind of the strategies that we might use for these kind of simple AI processes. So I'm going to go through some examples really from the last century, in thinking about how artists have used different approaches and how there might be some parallels in the ways that we can use AI. This isn't the only way we can use AI, but perhaps this gives us some ideas for some kind of practical, pragmatic approaches that don't require a great deal of technology. So as a first example, montage and collage. So thinking about how the Surrealists in the past have used montage, collage, bringing elements together, juxtaposing different creative styles, different creative outcomes, content, bringing it together in something which is then sparks originality, that is somehow new, that provides that kind of novelty element of creativity. And obviously you can treat that in quite a surreal way and put together imagery that is stark and jarring, or is witty, or is funny, or is satirical in some way. There's lots of opportunities for that, but also just the idea of sort of almost like combinational creativity. So bringing together two elements that we haven't really seen clashed together before, and thinking about what that gives us that might be new, that gives us a fresh look or a fresh outlook on a particular image. So there's lots of examples of this, throughout the history of creativity. These kind of periods, particularly the Surrealists bringing these things together, doing montages, doing collages, I think gives us some examples of how that might work. So cutting things up, montaging onto a board, creating objects that are sort of a combination of multiple different objects. There are opportunities maybe within AI to do this, because what AI can do, or machine learning within AI, is you can train it on different things, and you can train it on two very different subjects and have results that are sort of combining those, that are kind of crashing those together in interesting and unpredictable ways. Something else in a kind of similar vein is Cutups. So this is something that's been used by artists for a long time, certainly in the later part of the last century. I'm going to just show a couple of videos now that explain this process. And these are from the Open Culture website. They do quite a good job of explaining how people in the past have used Cutups. So I'll just play those now. This first one is...
Now, these experiments started not on tape recorders, but on paper. In 1959, Brian Geisen said that writing is 50 years behind painting, and applied the montage technique to words on a page. And this technique had already been used in painting at that time for 50 years. It was, in fact, kind of old hat in painting. Brian copied out phrases from newspapers and magazines, then took a scissors and cut these selections into pieces and rearranged the fragments at random. And these cut-up experiments appeared in Minutes to Go in 1959. When you experiment with cut-ups over a period of time, you find that some of the cut-ups and rearranged text seem to refer to future events. I cut up an article written by John Paul Getty and got, "It's a bad thing to sue your own father." This was a rearrangement and wasn't in the original text. And a year later, one of his sons did sue him. We had no explanation for this at the time, it just suggesting the press, when you cut into the present, the future leaks out. But we simply accepted it and continued the experiments. The next step was cut-ups on the tape recorder, and Brian was the first to take this obvious step. Now, here are some tapes which Brian made with all the technical facilities of the BBC in London, and they show, I think, what can be done with a human voice and one phrase.
All active, calling all reactive agents. All active, calling all active agents re, calling all active agents re, calling all active reagents, calling all agents reactive, calling all reagents active. All agents active, calling all agents reactive, calling re all active agents, calling re all agents active, calling reagents active, all calling re.
Okay, I'm going to leave that one there because that audio continues for some time, but you can see how it is being used across different mediums. So within fine art, first of all, but then within writing as well, as a way of kind of creating compositions or creating inspiration. It's also an interesting idea in there about cutting into the present to reveal the future. And there's certainly some interesting things that happen there, and particularly when we're looking in relation to maybe using content that is your own content, that is work you've already generated, and thinking about how if you train something on your own work, what happens then if you sort of cut it up, rearrange it, how that then reflects future work. So that's an idea actually that's also reflected in this video. So this is later on, David Bowie using it within his creative practice.
This is the way I do cut-ups. I don't know if it's like the way Brian Geisen does his or Burroughs does his, I don't know. But this is the way I do. I've used this method only on a couple of actual songs, but I've used it for more than anything else is igniting anything that might be in my imagination. I mean, it can often come up with very interesting attitudes to look into. I tried doing it with diaries and things, and I was finding out amazing things about me and what I'd done and where I was going. And a lot of the things that I'd done, it seemed that it would predict things about the future or tell me a lot about the past. It's really quite an astonishing thing. I suppose it's a very Western tarot. I don't know. Anyway, let's see what happens. I'm an alligator.
Okay, so using it kind of in a similar way there, cutting things up to interesting juxtapositions, and as you say, using that to fire the imagination in some way. So it might not be that what you put together from these processes is a final product, but it might inspire you as a creative then to take something in a new direction or to think of a new type of outcome that you're working on. So really think about how AI could do that same process by generating things which might not be finished, polished products in their own right, but might point you towards interesting new directions, and think about how then you work with that. What kind of role does that play within the creative process? Another kind of way of working creatively, a creative strategy from the past that might be kind of useful within this kind of context of AI, is Alitoricism. So this is the use of chance within creativity. So for example, rolling a dice, flipping a coin, and using the results of that to take you in certain directions, to make creative decisions effectively on your behalf. So there's lots of examples of that in the past, but some examples from music, for example, John Cage, using these kind of random processes to help him compose music and this composition process. So whether that's kind of using the I Ching in order to kind of almost create sort of random systems and then base music on the back of those, or doing things which are just from a completely different context. So using something which effectively is very random, another system from another context, but applying it to the context of music. So for example, using star charts. So finding a book of star charts, noting the position of the stars on this chart, laying that on a piece of sheet music, and composing in relation to that. So marking down the position of the stars, then the composition of notes, for example. So this is effectively very random, but it's sort of making this connection to something else, to another area, to another discipline, to another field of study or knowledge, and bringing that into your new creative context as a way of directing you, showing you different directions, and leading you perhaps to unexpected results. So again, there's ways of thinking about how we do that with AI as well. But maybe what it's producing might seem unexpected, might seem random. It might even be examples of AI not working particularly well. We're sort of really interested in that as an approach. So when AI gives us results which aren't particularly well performed, or they're not trained in the way that we expected, when effectively when AI goes wrong, how do we use it? Or how do we misuse these sort of examples of AI in order to lead to more creative outcomes? Another example, again from the last century, just worth thinking about is perhaps the Situationists and things like psychogeography, and how they use kind of randomness or unexpected ways of exploring, in this case, the city. So finding different paths, different ways through a city by using different methods, maybe methods of chance, or maybe by laying a different map over the map of the city and finding different points to go to. Again, there's sort of different approaches in there, different creative approaches, which might help you break out of your current ways of working, which is in a similar way to Situationists wanted to break out of the sort of the conformities of the city. So looking back at kind of these older techniques and thinking, is there something in that we can apply to AI? These are very low tech solutions. Can we apply that same ethos to working with machine learning, working with AI? Another aspect that potentially we can explore in using these tools, and some of the tools we'll look at today, is things like oblique strategies and things like instructions. So this is quite good for text generator tools. So things that can give you text or respond to a prompt with some text, or with things like instructions. So can we sort of get the AI to give us instructions to tell us what to do creatively in a more direct way, not by producing some content like a visual that then we respond to, but actually with text telling us some instructions or giving us some direction. So things like oblique strategies by Peter Schmidt, is an example of that in a really analog way. Having these little phrases, these instructions, these ideas, and allowing to kind of pick those randomly and decide, actually, yeah, that kind of relates to the creative problem I'm working on at the moment. That maybe gives me an idea, or it gives me a restriction or a constraint which I can work with, or I can work against in the creative process. So can we get AI, machine learning to help us do that? Also a kind of instructional based art is things like instructional art of people like Saul Lewitz, again, from the last century, thinking about how we might get it very directly to give us instructions, tell us what to do, pick up a pencil, perform these tasks, as a way of then getting to a different point, to something that perhaps we wouldn't do on our own. There's also just sort of generative art as an inspiration. So in the early days of computer art, how getting computers to perform the same actions over and over again, because that's what they were good at, can lead to some interesting results, can lead actually each time there's slight variance, there's slight differences, and we might be able to learn something from that. Well, that might actually be an interesting creative outcome in its own right. So people like Vera Molnar doing this kind of work several decades ago, can we apply it now to AI and get AI to produce similar results? In terms of collaboration, again, we don't need to look to AI and intelligent systems to think about how we can collaborate with machines. This is something that's been going on pre-computers, or at least pre-digital computers. There's lots of examples of this type of work within kind of seminal exhibition that appeared at the ICA in the 1960s called Cybernetic Serendipity. And a few of these sort of examples are from there, or these artists were sort of working with that same installation. So Desmond Paul Henry is one of those, and he worked with mechanical computers. Actually, they were bomb site computers, so they were sort of torn out of old bombers after the Second World War, and they were these mechanical things for working out when to release a bomb from a bomber. But he was using this for this very creative artistic outcome, and really working in collaboration, thinking that the machine is producing unexpected results that then can inspire him as an artist, and how you create this dialogue going backwards and forwards, and then responding to that, maybe adding stuff into it yourself as the artist. So this kind of collaboration, this dialogue, is an interesting thing to explore. The last kind of example I'll show of this is from Jean Tinguely. So this video from the 1950s explains how he was working with machines, and perhaps there's a sort of similar ethos we can bring into working with AI.
From the precise to the abstract, and to meet a man whose conception of the word makes other modern artists seem like stuffy old masters, let's introduce Parisian artist Jean Tinguely. His latest contribution, seen in this country for the first time at Mayfair's Kaplan Galleries, are robot machines come sculptures which themselves create unique drawings and paintings. They're called Metamatics. Tinguely describes his invention as happy machines, yet at the same time he calls them anti-machines in the sense that they work with mechanical disorder. The idea, of course, is that the would-be artist collaborates with the Metamatics, controlling its speed, movement of the canvas, and the medium used. Needless to say, a finished work is always different, since the controls and motors are constructed in such a way that repetitive action, so hated by Tinguely, is impossible. The Metamatics are demonstrated at the gallery by inserting a 5-shilling token. From then on, you're on your own in the strange realms of do-it-yourself abstract art.
Okay. We'll leave that one there, but you can kind of see this same process, the sort of bringing the chaos of the machine and trying to respond to that and bring that into the creative process. So sort of leveraging the unexpected. And sort of reveling almost in the fact that these things can go wrong and they can produce results which are unexpected, but there is potentially some creative value in that. So those are some examples of completely un-AI related. These are old examples. These are mechanical, analog processes that can be used to sort of enhance creativity. And of course, there's lots of things you can do with the AI tools that I'm going to show you today, and there's lots of approaches you can take to working with AI and creativity. But perhaps that gives some examples of, if you're not sort of familiar with the technology, some sort of approachable, pragmatic, practical things that you can do. And hopefully the tools that we're going to go through now will give you some idea about how you can apply this kind of idea we're talking about to this AI, to this kind of technology that we now have. So I'm going to go through these now. We're going to look at JPDJ first, so text generation, and then go through some of these other ones. Before I kind of begin this process, I'm going to be going through these sort of live. These are all things that run in the browser. So one of the kind of factors we consider when choosing these particular tools is that they should be as simple as possible. So they could be easy to use. They're mostly free to use. They're nearly all code free. So there's nothing that in particular that you need to no coding you need to do, no programming. You don't need that kind of background. You don't need that kind of knowledge necessarily to run these. They're all browser based. They can take some time. So a lot of these things are running in the cloud. To generate images can actually be quite a slow process, and training images can certainly take a long time. So what I've done, as well as the stuff that we'll go through today, it might not be possible to kind of see the results for these in the sessions today, because we're going to go through them quite quickly. But you can also see a run through of all these tools on our website. So on augmentingcreativity.info. If you look at that page, you can see a video guide for each one of these tools. So you can go through at your own speed, at your own leisure, and kind of the parts of the process that take a long time have been clicked down, so you can kind of see the end results. But I'll still go through these examples here today, so we can kind of see them all, and you get some idea of the range of stuff that's available. Okay, so the first one, as I say, that we're going to look at is JPDJ. This is an open source text generation tool. You may have heard of sort of other GPT models that are out there that are more kind of produced by people like OpenAI, that are very cutting edge, that can take some time to get up and start using. This is a very accessible, open access version of essentially the same thing. So it's been trained on a great big corpus of data. It's got loads of text that it's been trained on. It will allow you to put a prompt in, so you can put a sentence in, you can ask a question, you can give it the first line of something, and then have it respond to that or continue that in some way. So it could be used to create narratives. So you can use it as sort of a creative writing tool. You can use it to create instructions, like we saw in some of the instruction art that we saw the examples of, offer advice. You can get it to respond to questions, all kinds of things like that. So we'll have a look at that now. So I'll just come out to this presentation, and we'll look at the browser, and we'll see if we can get this up and running. So hopefully you can still see all of this. So this is the website. So the website you need to go to, it's on the slide there, is 6b.alutha.ai, and you can see links to all these on our website. All that we need to do to get this running, once this page is loaded, is to give it a text prompt. So we could do something like ask it a question. We could say, there's some factors we can play with here. So there's some different properties we can change. So we can try and make it a bit more random, get it to produce something that's further away from its stuff that it's been trained on. Or we can try and get it to produce something that's a bit more predictable on what it's been trained on. But the parameters as they stand there are fine. So we can just kind of run those. It might take a few seconds to load. Let's try again. I'm going to try reloading this page. Okay, it seems like it's having some trouble loading that at the moment. These are all online. Do try these out yourself. So if there's any problems with them kind of at this moment of time, they might have systems that are down, or might be out of the cloud or something like that. But you can still run these in your own time. So if we have any trouble running them, do look at the videos which are online, and hopefully that will take you through the whole process. But also have a look at this in your own time. As you can load these up in your browser now, you might have better luck than I'm having with it. I'll just kind of put in some other prompts as well. Maybe this will reconnect and we'll get it working. But if it doesn't, hopefully you can see some examples at least. So you could say, ask a question like this. see what it responds with. Usually it responds with quite a lengthy answer about what it feels creativity is, which sometimes can be useful, sometimes not. You can also give it sort of creative text. So if we give it something like, I'm just going to copy in some text here. So kind of the starting of a story, something like that. Maybe if I change these parameters. Perhaps it won't respond to this. But if you have like the start of a story, something where you're setting up a scene or you're setting up a narrative, and then see how it responds to that. So here we go. We have the result there. So the prompt I've given it is a brilliant piece of prose. It was a dark and stormy night as the lightning flashed outside. Suddenly there was a loud banging at the door. Everyone in the room looked around as the door slowly opened to reveal. And then it's continued. The AI has continued. A man in a black coat and black hat. He looked quite menacing. Who goes there? He demanded. It's me, it's me, it's me. Okay. So you're going to get different results from this. And each time you run this, and you can run it over and over again, you're going to get slightly different results. And it's interesting to see what it kind of picks up on each time. And it might respond to certain ideas. It might kind of bring a certain style to it each time. But each time it might give you something to work with. So for example, it might kind of give you character names, or it might give you an idea of the kind of the next scene, or it might give you more information about the setting. And those could be things that maybe you respond to or you bring into your own work. A woman with a strange blue glow seemed out of place. Okay, so this might inspire you. Might be things you can bring in creatively. It's like using this text directly within whatever it is that you're doing. There's other kind of approaches that we can take. So if we think more about kind of instructions, see if we can get it working on this. So if I give it the instruction, something like, here are 5 things you need to make a really unique and creative piece of art. 1, a large piece of paper. 2, and then we'll leave it. If you set up a structure like this, then quite often it will respond to that. So if you give it the beginning of a list, or even if you say things like there are 5 things, quite often it will respond to that. It will realize that what you're trying to get is a list, and it will give you something back that sort of conforms to that. It won't work every time, but it can do, and then that can help you with kind of your creative process, or it can help with the instructions. So in this case, what we need is the large piece of paper, but also a pen, a camera, creative mind, and a sense of humor. Okay, and then maybe it might give us some instructions. So start by drawing a large rectangle on the paper. The size of the rectangle doesn't matter, but blah, blah, blah. It can be a picture of your dog, a picture of a fish. Okay, interesting. So it might be picking these up from stuff that's within its training model. So the data it's already been given. It might be combining all kinds of different things, but either way, these kind of results might be unexpected. So you can see what's around. So you can run this over and over again. You're going to get different things each time. This might give you an idea of some instructions to follow. You could take this and you could follow this, just as other constraints in the previous examples that we've seen. Give you certain things you can follow, certain instructions, and that can help you sort of direct your creativity. Okay, these are all kind of abstract things. We can, do slightly more interesting things. Maybe we said pineapple, the first thing on the list, and it should then respond to that, and it might then give you sort of different objects which are more in line with that. So a pineapple, a large piece of paper. Okay, it's interesting. A hammer, a pair of scissors, a very large pot of paint. Okay. So these are ways of creating this, and there's lots of things you can do, lots of prompts. You can play around with the prompts in order to give you different types of instructions, perhaps, and then settle on one that you're happy with. There's also things you can do, like, so maybe this is giving us a list, which is helpful, but maybe it's not giving us all the instructions that we want. So it is trying there, but we can sort of change the prompt so it is more set up to give us instructions in particular. So tell us a process, not just a list. So here are 6 steps for creating an amazing original piece of art using a piece of string, a pineapple, a large piece of paper, a crayon, a pair of scissors. Obviously, you can change that around as you want. 1, take the paper and we'll see what it produces as a result of that. So here are our 6 steps, and it's given us exactly 6. So we've got to cut it into a rectangle. The size is slightly larger than the pineapple. Okay, so let's do that. Using a crayon, draw a large triangle on the paper, take the string, wrap it around the paper, creating a loop, the string, so on and so forth. Now, these might be nonsense, they might make sense, they might be things you can adapt or respond to or try and create, even if they're sort of impossible. either way, it's giving us some instructions. So that's kind of one tool and one way that we could use. Obviously, you could play around with this and find different things that you could do with the sort of text generation process. So that's JPDJ on Aliter AI. We'll now look at the next one. So the next thing we're going to look at is Runway. So let me just go back to slides and we'll just introduce that. Okay. So the next tool I'm going to introduce is a bit more advanced, or much more advanced. It's more complex. There's more things that are in it. It's a tool called Runway ML. It's been around for a couple of years now, and it's sort of developed in interesting ways. To begin with, it was quite sort of an experimental online platform where you could train models online. You could run models that already existed, machine learning models that did certain things like generated certain types of image, that did certain types of image detection or classification. They've also, one of the things they offer is video editing. So using AI in a really specific practical way. So not in this sort of more abstract speculative way, but to perform very specific tasks. For example, cutting someone out of an image. So a bit like Zoom is doing now with my backgrounds, you know, it's cutting out an image, it knows where I begin and end. They offer services like that. So using AI to perform tasks on video. And that's a big part now what they do, but you can still access the sort of the experimentation part of it. And you can still do things like training your own models and playing around with image generation and text generation. That's what we're going to look at today. So the part you need to look at is ML Lab. Now, all the other tools we're looking at today are completely free and code free. This one's code free, but it's not completely financially free because it's doing quite a lot and it allows you to do quite advanced things which actually require a lot of processing power. So they're quite powerful computers working quite hard, so training models, for example. Unfortunately, that's not a completely free process. So if you want to use Runway, it's a great tool. It offers loads of things that you can do, but you will need to sign up and pay a small monthly subscription. It's about $15 US. And then for performing certain tasks like training a model, there are some costs each time you do that, each time you train a new model. It costs a certain amount. We'll go through those costs as we look at the process. So something to bear in mind. It's not entirely free, but it's not massively expensive either. And it's quite an accessible way of getting into this sort of more advanced AI, doing stuff which is a bit more powerful with AI than some of the other stuff that we're looking at today. So worth checking out. So if I kind of show it, maybe a little bit of what the kind of thing that you can do. So in the example I'm going to show now, it's about training a model. Now, I've trained it previously. You'll kind of see the results of it here. So when you train a model, basically you need to get together a whole load of images. So images of a certain kind that sort of conform roughly to a similar form. So in this case, I've trained it on images of vases. And these images of vases are not my own work. I'm not taking these myself, but they're from an online accessible database from the British Museum. So these are vases which are in their collection that they have photographs of. So I put together about 500 images of these. And they're all vases, but they're all different styles, different periods, different shapes. But if you put them together and then train a model, then the AI can sort of learn something about what these vases are. And it visually sort of starts understanding them, and it can then start replicating them. And what you can then do is get Runway, in this case, to generate new images that that are in the same style or that resonate or have similarities to the vases it's trained on, but are new, that are sort of combinations of all of them together in a new way. And you can see a video of that playing here. So you can see the vases that it's generated and the sort of looping through these and showing different forms of them. So that's the kind of thing we can produce. And you can get videos like the one that's playing now from this process. But you can also get it to generate new images, so individual still images, which then maybe you can use in your work. And as I say, you can train it on stuff that already exists, like databases of images which are out there. So you can train it on vases in this case. You could also train it on your own work. So if you're a ceramicist and you make vases, you could train it on lots of your own images, or you can train it on your own sketches or your own designs or whatever it is that is your outcome from your creative process. And then you can train something which is sort of producing something in your own style, which can be interesting. What you can also potentially do is combine things. So you could train it on a whole load of images of vases, but then also train it on a whole load of paintings by a certain artist, and combine that into one model, which then means you might get some interesting results that are sort of bringing the style of an artist into these objects. You'll probably also get loads of results which are messy or chaotic or that don't really look like either thing. But again, it might be a way of kind of inspiring creativity, of showing us new directions in our work. So let me just take you through this process. Now, as I say, this can take a while. So running Runway, it's certainly training models can take hours and hours. So we're not going to go through all of that, but I'll introduce you to the process. And as I say, there's more information in the videos which are on the website. So to access Runway, it's quite simple. It's go to the Runway website, so runwayml.com, and you'll need to sign up. So you will need an account. There's certain amounts of things that you can do without having to sign up for a paid account. So there's our free things you can do. You can use models and things which have already been trained. But specifically what I'm talking about today, which is training something on your own images, that will require a paid account. So you can sign up, get your accounts, you can set up subscriptions. Once you've done all that, you'll get to this stage. So as we can see on the screen now. And there's lots of things that you can look at, so lots of different things you can do. But as I say, the main thing we're interested in is ML Lab, which is the area for sort of experimenting and training your own stuff. So you go up to your account, and then you click on ML Lab. We'll then load a new window which shows all the models that you can start using in your work. So models that have already been trained on lots of images or lots of creative content of a certain type, which you can then use to generate new images in that style, or new text, or whatever it might be. So you can see some being brought up on the screen now, and tasks that you can do with that. So you can create videos, you can do image analysis, so getting it to look at an image or a video and to text certain things in certain places. You can get it to generate images of a certain style, or apply a style to an image that you've already got, or to an object you've already got. You can get it to detect people and to detect, their posture, their movement. Get it to create animations automatically from a picture of a person, for example. All kinds of cool things that it does. If we want to do this training, though, which is what we're sort of interested in today, you need to go to the training section. So in the left-hand menu, if you look at training, click on there. Gives you some options. So there's different types of model that you can train. So there's image, so giving it loads of images and then getting it to generate new images that are like that or that respond to that. Text, same thing, giving it hundreds of pages of text and getting it then to learn a certain style of a writer or a certain type of content or structure, and getting it to generate stuff at the back of that. There's also object detection, so training it on images which have labels and saying, okay, these are all images of a certain type of thing, and then getting it to detect that thing in new images. For the stuff we're looking at the moment, probably image and text is the most useful, and we're going to look at image in particular, so getting it to train a model of images. So you can set up a new training experiments, put your own name in there, we'll go with the names there already. The first thing it needs you to provide is the data. So it's going to create this model based on lots of examples of existing content. You need to give it all those examples. So you can see at the top here for images, it recommends between 500 and 5,000 images. The more images you have, the stronger the model, the more likely it is to produce something like those images. Also, the more consistent the image, the more consistent the results will be. So, for example, my images of vases, they're all vases, they're all pictured in the same kind of format with the same kind of backgrounds. That means that consistency will exist in the outcome as well. They'll all look like they're pictured from a certain angle with a certain lighting and background and everything. That might not always be the case, if you're generating on a mixture of things, and that's fine, but you're going to get more unexpected or less consistent results, which might be good for what you're doing, or it might be less good, but it's just something to bear in mind. There are databases that they already have and data sets that you can already play with, like scenes of mountains, birds, airplanes, all kinds of stuff. If you wanted to upload your own, you just click on this button and it will take you to a dialog box where you just upload a zip file or a folder full of images that you've prepared. In this case, I've already uploaded some images, so we'll go with those for now. So click on this vases data set that's from the British Museum. You then get an option to pre-process your data set. So you might want to edit all your images so they're a similar size. You might want to crop them. You might want to do some kind of image processing to them to change the contrast or brightness, whatever. And there's some options for doing that within here. The main thing you probably want to do is crop them. So that usually you want them all at the same size, usually a square size, and they're kind of consistent with that. Actually, we can do that on the next screen. So we don't necessarily need to click on this. So if we click next, and then take us to our next training options. The next thing we need to choose is a model to base our new training model on. So to save time and make this as efficient as possible, what normally happens with this kind of training is that you're not starting from scratch. You're starting with a model that roughly conforms to what you're interested in. And then you're retraining. You're then adding into that lots of new images, which it will then learn, and it will relearn its previous model. The objects that we've got here, so it already has models that are already set up, that have already been trained on certain types of images. So we've got faces, objects, in this case cars, scenes, so mountains, and illustrations. Now, in a sense, it doesn't matter too much which one you choose, because if you do enough training, then it's going to relearn that model completely on the new images anyway. But it does help, particularly if we don't want to do too much training. It helps if we can use a model that sort of visually roughly conforms to the thing that we're trying to train it on. So if I'm trying to make a model of my vases, then I'm probably not going to choose faces, I'm going to choose objects, because those images that it's already trained on will be sort of visually probably more similar to vases than something like a face or a picture of a mountain, whatever it might be. You can go to advanced, and there are actually some other options within that. So you can choose, instead of cars, you can choose some other objects that it's been trained on. But probably it's easiest just to stick with the preset that's there. So that's what I did for this training. So once you've chosen your objects, you then can do a little bit of editing on the images. So you can choose how to crop them. So it really wants kind of a square image. So you might have to crop something that's portrait or landscape, so it's square, and it can do that for you. You can just tell it, I want to crop maybe in the center of the image, so it's most likely to capture the content of the image, or maybe you want it in a random place, or you might be happy with no crop at all if you've already done some editing. Once you've chosen all that, you're really ready to start training the model. And the only thing you then need to choose is how many training steps. So it's going to go through this iterative process, looping over and over again, looking at the images that you've given it, and learning and bringing those into the new model. The more steps you have to that process, the more it will learn about your images, and the more likely it will be that anything that it generates from that model will conform to your images, and it won't conform to the model that's already there. Now, it starts with 3,000. I think that's a good starting point for doing images. As I said, I've got about 500 images here. 3,000 should give you start giving you kind of interesting results from there. You don't really want to go below that. You could go up a little bit, so you could go to 4,000, for example. And you can always retrain more later on if you need to. But there is a cost with it. So this is one of the places where the cost comes in. You can see it has estimated cost there. So if we click on that, it will tell us roughly how much this is going to cost. So our 3,000 steps, it costs $0.005 per step. So in total, that's $15. So $15, you will get a model of your thing that you're training. Now, if you don't want to pay money, then there are other things we can do, and some of the other tools, the next tool will show, the VQ gives you some options for sort of training, or at least directing stuff towards a particular image or a particular style. But if you do want to sort of use this process, then yes, it will cost that much, and you'll need to sort of make sure that you've got credits in place. This is a completely credit-based system. So in other words, you're not likely to, you won't be able to kind of let this run and run. It will run up a massive bill that you weren't expected, and it's going to be hundreds of dollars. You don't need to worry about that, because it will only use the kind of prepaid credits you give it. So, and once it runs out of credits, it will just stop running the model. And obviously, if you're trying to train a model and you haven't got enough credits, it will warn you about that beforehand. So you can update your credits there, and kind of balance of how much training do you want to do versus how much you want to spend. We'll also tell you the time. So this is going to take 2 hours to produce. So it's 2 hours of running a processor. That's why there's a cost involved in doing that. Once you've done all that though, and you've chosen the training steps, you can then just hit start training. You won't do that now. I'm going to spend 2 hours doing that now. But if you do that, you just start training. You can then navigate away. You don't need to sort of keep the window open or do anything like that. You can close your computer. You can set it going overnight and just leave it. And once it's done the amount of steps that you've chosen, it's created the model, it will then send you an email. It will show you in the system. It will show you the model that you've created, and it will start by kind of giving you a video, like the video I showed earlier, showing you all the different options, showing you its generated objects that it's created. It will give you some sample images as well. And once you've got that, then you can start generating your own images and generating your own video off the back of those. So assuming we've been through this process, assuming we've trained our model, once you have it trained, that process is completed, then you can find your models in My Models. If you go to this section here, you'll find any models that you've created. So our one, I've already trained on vases, appears in here. It gives you some little thumbnails so you can see the kind of thing that it's produced. These are all images that it's created from the trained data. You hover over this and go to Edit Info. We'll give you some more options for things that you can then do with that. It's got a gallery here, so you can see that here is sort of a sample of the vases that it's created based on our training model. If you wanted to generate more images, then you go to Export Images and Video. Now, again, this is something that will kind of wear away in the background. We might see some results from it during the session, might not. I'll just keep letting it go and talk you through it. So there are two options here, video or images. Images is it's very simple, self-explanatory. You can generate a lot of images based on the model. So it will just go through your model and it will just start producing random images that are based on the model that it's got. So hopefully they should all look like vases in this case, or they'll look like whatever you've trained it on. And you've got some options there, like we had in the previous example, where you can change some of these parameters to so whether it's going to be sort of more random or more conforming to the images which are already there. You can also change the number of images that it exports. So if you just wanted 500 images, brand new images based on your model, you do that. You can do more or less within this parameter as well. Obviously, because this is running the model, there is again a small cost with that, not as much, but we can see that estimated cost here. So to produce 500 images using our new model that we've trained, maybe on our own work or on objects or images that we're interested in, so that will be $5 in total. Credits that will allow it to do that. If you didn't need that many images, obviously you could reduce the amount of images and it would then cost slightly less. So the other thing that you can do, if we have a look back at the video, this is kind of running right in the background. You should start seeing after a while some previews of the images coming up, which are sort of generated for free. The video that you can produce, might come up with a preview in a second, is basically what it calls a latent warp. So it's kind of generating random images like the image generator, but then it's sort of animating between one version of an image it's produced and another image. And that produces the video like we saw just before I started talking through Runway. So this sort of morphing, animated spacewalk through different types of potential image. And you can create new versions of that image, new versions of that video. So you sort of get one for free when you train the model, but if you wanted further ones, then you can do that here. And the way that it works is it will give you eventually some thumbnails of some potential images, and then you can choose to animate between one and another. And it will sort of go through lots of versions of that image, moving towards the image at the end. And you can actually do more than one. So you can put in maybe navigating between 3 different images. It will generate from one, going to that one, and then this one. So that's a good way of generating lots of images and having some kind of control over that. So look at that if you just want to sort of generate images based on the model that you've created. As I say, it's a bit slow here. You might have better luck if you're sort of not running a webinar in the background as well. If we cancel this process, the other thing I'll just mention as well is if you want more control over the images that it produces, then you can add your model to a workspace. So add model to workspace, it'll come up with a name for you. So workspaces is where you can sort of run experiments in Runway. So it will give you an interface where basically you give it an input, so like a prompt or something that is allows you to start controlling the generative process. So in this case, it's a vector input, they call it, and then it will give you an output. So the input that it will give you as standard for sort of an image generation is this grid. Now, again, if we leave it for long enough, it will start generating images in here, and we'll get, as we saw before, little thumbnails of vases in our case. So you can look at those here, and what it will give you though is a sort of, a bit like it does in the animation, sort of moving between different versions. But you can control that navigation using this grid. So you can start moving between different types of pots. So if you want it to be sort of, more blue, then start moving towards the blue side. If you want it to be more in this shape, then move towards that image, and it will then generate more like that. So it gives you some sort of navigation opportunities. You can start directing where this goes a little bit. This is taking a long time to load that, so we won't let this come up now, but it's the same kind of process. You select the type of images you want here, and then run the model. There'll be an estimated cost for that, and then you can generate those images. So all of this is for image generation. If you wanted to do text generation, so if you wanted to generate text content, it's a very similar process. You just need to give it lots of text rather than lots of images, and then it will give you things like prompts where you can, instead of thumbnails or images, it will give you like a text prompt. You can ask it a question, you can give it a starting sentence, just like we did earlier, and it will generate stuff off the back of that. So this is a sort of more advanced way of generating images and text, but particularly doing that with a trained model, something that you've chosen the data for, something where you trained it on your own work or a combination of work, or work in a certain style or images in a certain style. So that's Runway. We've got a couple more to go through, so I'll close that one down now. And let me just introduce you to some other ones. So the next one we want to look at is VQGAN. Now again, this is one that runs in the browser, and it runs in the clouds. We'll see if we can start getting some results out of it initially, but it might just be that I take you through the process here, and then in your own time you can start generating images, but we'll see what we can get from it, and I'll show you some examples. So this is a text to image generator. So again, it's something where you can give it a description and it will try and produce an image relating to that description from the prompt that you give it. It's pre-trained, so it's running from image models that already exist, but it gives you some options within that. So models trained on different types of images or different amounts of images. So it doesn't, like Runway, give you the opportunity to train your own model by giving it hundreds or thousands of images and making it and training on that. But it does have an interesting feature, which is why I've included it here, which is that you can also give it one or two or a few images, which it will then use as part of its sort of prompt, as part of what it's generating. And that can be a much quicker, simple way of getting it to produce work in a certain style. So you can still give it a text description, but you can also sort of give it an image to sort of throw into the mix as well, an image in a certain style, for example. This is completely free to use, this one. It runs on Google's Collab platform. It looks quite codey. So unlike something like Runway, which is a very sort of user-friendly interface, this one is a bit different. It's sort of, Collab is a coding platform where people can write code and then try out code. So it looks a bit more technical, but don't be scared by that, because if you don't have a coding background, you can still use this. It's got an interface where actually the only things you need to change is a couple of text boxes, and then you hit run and it's done. You won't actually need to get into the code itself. So the kind of things you can do with it. So for example, these are some images that I produced using it. So this is with a prompt, a bunch of colorful flowers. And this is over not that many iterations. So this probably took 3 or 4 minutes to produce. Now the one on the left is just a straight prompt. So it's just giving it the phrase, a bunch of colorful flowers, and it produces that one on the left. But the one on the right, I've given it the same prompt, but I've also uploaded an image. And the image I uploaded was actually an illustration. It was an illustration by the children's illustrator, Eric Carl. So like Hungry Caterpillar. So again, this is only over a few iterations, so there's only a few minutes work. But you can see there's a difference between these. And the one on the right has a sort of flatter style, it has slightly different colors. it has visual elements that perhaps you can start seeing conform to the sample image that I gave it, to the Eric Carl image. If we let it run for longer, it might bring more of those out, or we could give it more images and it might more precisely. But you can see there's a difference here. We can start directing it. We can start putting another image into the mix that might not train it, but at least direct it in a certain direction, which could be useful. So I'll just take you through this. We'll see if we can get it running. It might not give any results during this session, but we'll see how it goes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and just start running it, because it will take a while to run, and I'll then talk you through the process afterwards. So you can just do this to begin with. You can just go up to runtime, hit run all. It will then give you some warnings. It will say this notebook requires high RAM, which it does. It's doing image generation, and telling you that in the free version of Colab, which is this, there might be some restrictions. So it might cut you off after a while. It might kind of limit your what you're doing, and that's fine because it's free. You can pay to upgrade, in which case you don't get those restrictions. But if you're not in a hurry, then you can kind of use this version as is. So we click OK to that, and it will then start doing. I'll talk you through a little bit what it's doing, and then where to change the parameters, and we'll see if we can get it generating something. So this is all hosted in the cloud. It's code that's already been set up. So this is a notebook, they call it, so a code file effectively by Catherine Krausen, and it's been added to by other people over the years, or months people have added little amendments to it. But you can access this code and you can start running it for free, and you can start amending it as you wish to do. To start with, you don't really need to make any amendments. All you need to do is sort of start running it. But I'll take you down roughly what it's doing. Is it's setting up like a GPU, so it's setting up in the cloud the processor that it's going to use. It's already been set up for you. It's installing libraries. So this is the thing, the first time you run it might take a while. So it's downloading and installing some libraries it's going to use. So it's downloading Clip, for example, and Clip is sort of a text tool. So that's the part of it that will understand your description and understand what that means. And then the VQ GAN, the GAN part is then what does the generating the images. There's a few libraries it needs, and they're quite large. So it will take a few seconds to download them into the code. It doesn't download them onto your computer, just downloads them into the cloud, the part of the cloud that's running this code at the moment. As well as those libraries, so the code, it's also downloading the models. So the models which have been trained on a certain image set. So there are a few available here, and you can play around with these if you like. So for example, ImageNet is the one that uses by default. That's a really large set of images, classified images. So lots of images with names attached. And you can then use that as the model that it's using to generate your images. So if you give it certain words, it will know what kind of image to produce. That's sort of, it's open source. There are issues with that. There's issues of all kinds of AI and machine learning that some of those classifications might not be great, but it is a very large data set, so you're going to get potentially some interesting results from it. But there are other ones in there as well, things like Faces HQ and Celeb HQ. These are ones which are trained on people's faces. So you might decide that actually you can choose different models depending on what kind of image you're trying to produce. So for example, if you wanted to produce pictures of people, then those ones, Celeb HQ and Faces HQ would be a good way of doing that. If you want to produce work that looks like art, then Wiki Art would be a good one. If you're just trying to produce objects, then stick with the default, stick with ImageNet. And as with all these, you can just run it straight away with the parameters which are already in there. That's absolutely fine. So as it's running through each one of these sections. So it goes from top to bottom manual. The parameters really is the only section that you need to play around with. So if we look at the parameters which are in here, we can see here there's I put in text. So this first box, this might be the only thing you touch in all this code. It's not code, you just need to add some text in. So just like we did in the previous examples, put in some text, a description that you want it to produce, and it will then respond to that. You can change other parameters like the width and height, for example, the images that it produces. You can also change the amount of iterations it will go through. With default, this is set to -1. What that means is just infinite. It'll just keep running this until basically the code gets closed down, which will happen after a while because this is a free account. and it will produce as many images as it can. You don't want that to happen, and you just want to give it a limit, then 1,000 images is a good place to start. So it will go through kind of producing work each time. It will get hopefully closer and closer to the description you've given it. And yeah, we'll do that up to 1,000 times. You can change that to whatever you want. The only other thing you might want to change is this here, so target images. And this is where you get the opportunity to upload an image or a series of images which represent some kind of style or theme or visual element that you want to bring into your generated results. So if we just did a bunch of colorful flowers on its own, it would give us a bunch of colorful flowers like we saw earlier. But if you want to actually give another image into the mix, give it another style or something that you can run with, then this is the place to do it. Now to do that, you need to upload the image first. And you do that in this section here. You go to the folder icon on the left-hand side, where it says Files. You can then click on Upload, and that will upload an image into the cloud that will just be within this session. So it won't remember it there forever. Just while you're running the code, that image will stay there and be used as part of the code. So you can select your image there. So the image that I'm uploading, as I say, is an illustration by Eric Cole. So it's just a group of images, of illustrations in his style. And hopefully we'll then start using that as a basis for what it's producing. So we'll click open, we'll then upload it. We'll see it in the side here. And then let's just run it all again. So then go through the whole process again. So that might take a while, but hopefully once it's downloaded the image, the models once or the libraries once, hopefully it should run quicker next time. Let me just try that again. Okay. Let's come up with an error there. Hopefully what you should see then is it runs through this whole thing and it will then start producing images. I just make the runtime, try that again. So the runtime is kind of your session on the cloud computer. So sometimes if you're having problems, if you just restart that process again, it might clear some of those errors. So those areas are cleared and it's just running through. So this might take a while. We might kind of leave it in the background just while I show you the last bit, and we'll see if it then produces images in the style that we've asked it to do. If you want to kind of see a more condensed version of this process, then if you check out the videos on our website, so augmentingcreativity.info, you can see videos for all these things I'm going through in a slightly more condensed way, and you can follow it at your own time, your own speed. So we'll let that run. What should happen is once it's then downloaded all the libraries, it might take a few minutes to do that. In this section here, it says fire up the AI. You will start seeing some images appearing. So you'll start seeing its first images. And the first ones that it produces will be kind of just noise. So it will just be a sort of a blurry image because it starts just with a sort of random image of sort of random noise, like static, blurry static. So you'll see that first. And what it's set up to do as standard is that every 50 iterations, so every sort of 50 versions that it goes through, each time it's learning more and more and more, it will chuck out a little thumbnail so you can see it. And you can see it's counting through now, so it's produced 16, 17. So once it gets to 50, it will show us an example of what it's producing. And we'll be able to see, well, how well is it conforming to the description we gave it, so a bunch of colorful flowers, and has it started using the images that we put in. In our case, we only put one image in, but if you wanted to put more in, you could upload more images there and just list them in here. You separate them with the pipe icon, which is the sort of vertical up and down character. So you can see the first one is just blurry static. The second one, we're starting to see something more interesting. We're starting to get color. We're starting to get kind of flower type shapes potentially. If we let that run and run, each time it will get clearer and clearer, hopefully. And by the time you get to maybe 300, 400, might take a few minutes to get there, but once you get to that point, you'll start seeing things which are much more distinct and that might conform to what you're wanting to generate. And you can see it's already updating now. If you want to download these images, You can do that in the file section as well, in the folder to look for is steps. So if you open that up, it will open up and you can see a list of all the steps it's been through. So remember, we're only seeing every 50th step, but all of them are in there, so you can see how it changes over time. You can even create an animation of that, which is something it will do at the bottom of the screen. But you can, any one of these images, or all of them, you can download them. So you can just click on the little dots, click download, and it will give you that package. And you can start playing around with it. So that's VQGAN plus clip. Hopefully that gives you an example of how to use it. Obviously, there's lots of parameters you can play with, but if you're not familiar with code, don't worry. Just use those parameters I've shown you, and you should start getting some interesting results. Okay, I'm going to close this one down now, and then that's our final tool that we're going to be looking at today. So if I start the runtime there. Remember with this one, if you do navigate away, so if you close your browser, the session is lost and the images and everything are lost. So make sure you are saving images before you do that. So the very last thing that we're going to look at in this session is a site called Wombo. And this might be something you've already heard of before. I'll just give it a quick introduction and then we'll look at it. This hopefully should be, especially compared to the last video we looked at, a really simple one to use. So I did try it online earlier and it was being quite slow. So you might find that it's a bit slow, but on the whole, when you use this, it's very quick. And it's a text to image generator, as with the previous ones we've seen. It allows you to put in a text prompt, a description, some kind of prompt, some kind of text that you want to create an image of, and it will then go off and create an image of it. And it allows you to do that using certain styles. So again, it has different models you can choose and different visual styles. And it's all free, it's all online, it's all in the browser. So let's look at that one and see if we can get that kind of working. So when you go to app.wombo.art, it will come up with this. You say start creating, it will bring up this text prompt. So we can put anything that we want in there, really. Kind of, we can describe a scene, we can describe an object, we can describe a collection of things. So let's say we're going to choose just a scene that starts off mountains and a lake. That's simple, interesting. Next thing you have to choose is the art style. So these are kind of using different models trained on different styles, and there's different visual kind of elements in that. So if you want it to be very vibrant, choose that. If you want it very high definition, HD is a useful one. If you want it to look like a black and white etching, you can choose that. Or you can just choose no style. Maybe I'll do that. And we'll see if this works. As I say, it was taking quite a few minutes to produce this before, so we might not see results, but hopefully if you try this at home, try it in your own time, you'll see some results quite quickly. So usually you'll start seeing an image building up just over a few seconds, and easily within a minute you'll see a kind of an image on the right there. Now what it produces is is a social media friendly portrait image, as you can see the outline of there, and it produces it with a sort of a border around it saying Wombo. You can also choose to put the prompt as part of the image as well. And you can then share that. You can also just download that image and you can save it, edit it, do what you want with it. So once it's created the image, once you have this, and it can produce some quite startling results, quite high definition results, or whatever you've described it to do. Once you've done that, you can save it, download it, and you can start doing what you want with it. And again, thinking back to sort of the examples that we looked at earlier, sort of pre-AI, creative strategies, you can think about how you use that in different ways. It might not be that what you've described is the sort of final outcome. It's not like that's the thing you want to produce, but it might give you some visual elements that you want to work with. And you might want to start bringing that into a collage, or you might want to bring one element of what it's done, edit that, pull it out, put it into your work in different ways. So use it as this sort of stimulation process, this inspiration process, and you should be able to get some good results from that. So this is definitely taking a long time. Do try it at home. Go to app.wombo.art. There's also an app that you can download. Hopefully for you it will run quicker. Maybe if we try it later, it'll run quicker as well. I'm not sure if we'll get a result out of this or not, but ideally this should be kind of one of the simpler ones. So it's just a website you go to, just put in some text and shoot some images. It doesn't seem to be working like that today, but do try it and hopefully you'll have some better results. Okay, I'll let that run in the background. Maybe we'll be able to come back to that and see a result. Maybe you've been able to try that in your own time, in your own homes. But really, that's kind of it for the different tools that you can go through. So that's kind of all the four that I wanted to show. Obviously, there are lots more available to you, potentially, that you could look at. But I've chosen these ones, as I say, because they're kind of the simplest to run, and they should be able to run on any computer. You don't need any particular setup. You can just run them in the browser. You can even run them on a phone, tablet, something like that. So hopefully that's given you some ideas about tools that you can use, things that you might be able to bring into creative practice. If you do that and you think actually you've got some really interesting ideas for directions you can take that, ways that you can use those tools, then do let us know. We'd love to see you. I'd love to hear from you, what different approaches you've taken. Do consider applying to our workshop as well. As I say, there's more information on that. If you have any questions or you'd like to discuss any of this further, then you have time to do that now if you'd like to. But also after this event, you can contact me at rch.ac.uk. So if you have questions, drop them into the Q&A now, and we'll try and go through some now. And if not, thank you very much for joining us, and hope you consider the workshop.